everybody. Welcome back to the Sanctuary Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Kevin, and we are here in part of Season 2, which we're talking to several guests about a variety of topics, but one thing that we're really honing in on is the topic of creativity and how creativity is an expression of spirituality and how creativity is an expression of our connection with Creator God, who still loves to be creative and he loves working in the hearts of creatives. So I have an awesome guest here with us today. I want to introduce my friend Brad. Why don't you give us the full introduction of who you are?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Good morning. Good whatever time
you're watching.
My name is Brad. Go by Zabbai. Go by a lot of different names. I am a Christian hip hop rapper. I like to go by Christian worship artist because I just view that my heart behind my music is worship, but it just has a fire melody and traps and 808s behind it, right? Different drum. I'm also a photographer. I'm actually a little bit of a graphic designer also. I know a little bit about Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom, all those good things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Brad, what's your real full name?
My full name is Bradsley Jerome Rumble. So if you ever hear someone call me BJ, that's where those two come from.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because, your wife, Cindy, she calls you BJ. And the first couple of times I'm like, I think she's talking about Brad, but I don't know who this BJ guy is. And then other people call you Zabbai, and I'm like, all right. So anyways, Brad, we've known each other since, for a few years. And I've kind of heard your full story a little bit. But for those who don't know you, where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. Born and raised. 203.
Nice. And so tell me a little bit about growing up in Stamford. What was that like? Yeah.
I mean, growing up in Stamford was, it was fun, never really a dull moment. Growing up on the west side, there was always some type of activity taking place. I was huge on being outside. Like, I wanted to be outdoors as much as possible. Not so much of like nature, like wasn't really a nature boy. I don't like bugs, so I used to go to camps and I used to get awards for being like the biggest bug hater.
Wow.
And I would like have like a trophy, like, yes, get me the raid and the off. I will kill every bug outside if need be.
So you missed your calling as like the exterminator.
Yeah. Oh, well, see, that would never been a call. I'd be like, Lord, this is one thing you have given the wrong title to. I'd have given it to someone else.
Cool. So you grew up in Stamford. You give me a little snapshot of your journey of finding Jesus. It's a big story. And I would tell people you've got to hear the full story. But give us the snapshot of, did you grow up knowing Jesus or how did you come to faith?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My father's a pastor. My mom was a first lady. So I grew up hearing Jesus literally since the day I was born. I think I went from the hospital to a prayer service, like right in the,
nice.
And I was probably crying and they were like, see, he's screaming, Lord, thank you, Jesus. So like very, very bumpy road coming to know Jesus, a lot of no's, a lot of, I kind of know you, but I don't really want to get to know you. And honestly, the best way I could put it is I didn't find the Lord found me. And it was at an opportune time where I had the ability to say yes. And then I finally figured out that it was actually about relationship and not rules, and changed my life.
Wow. So that was a turning point for you.
Yeah.
Because the rules.
Yeah. I already had that growing up. So I didn't want to have physical rules over my body with my parents. Then I didn't want to have spiritual rules over my soul. So then until I understood that these rules actually set me free, I was going to continue to live in this bondage. And then, as soon as I said yes to God, he just started kind of peeling it back. And it was like me being a blind man. And then I saw things that I thought I actually knew, but I had no understanding of.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. A couple weeks ago, and you've been part of the Sanctuary community for how long now?
Oh, man. I always forget. I think it's been about 4 years now. Maybe even
4
5.
years. Nice.
Yeah.
And you've served in a variety of different ways on worship team.
Yeah.
Just, sharing your story is a huge one. Allowing people to see your journey. A couple weeks ago at midweek is our midweek expression in the summer of coming together, eating some food, playing some games, hearing some stories, and sharing our life with each other. You had this phrase that you had us repeat. Do you remember what it was?
Oh man, you probably remember better than I do.
That you are responsible for your own spiritual growth.
Yep, you're responsible for your own growth.
And how's that impacted your relationship coming out of rules and coming into a relationship?
Man, I think even like when we're talking about coming out of rules, like understanding that I have a loving God that loves me. The big piece for me was understanding like I am not covered based upon my parents' faith and that I'm responsible for my own faith. And so even as I began my relationship with the Lord was like, that was a huge moment for me, especially when I started evangelizing, getting a little bit bold. Whenever I'd ask someone like, hey, do you know Jesus? The very first thing they'd say, either my parents go to church or I was raised in church. It had nothing to do with their relationship with God. And that was huge for me. Like as I began to understand, some people had an ideology that they were saved based upon somebody else's prayers, not their own prayers.
Right.
So it's been a developing, ongoing, as I've been walking with the Lord, huge understanding that like I'm responsible for my relationship with the Lord because the Lord has laid the framework for me to grow as deep as I want to go. And so if I'm, 1/10 into the ground and I say, this is as much as I want to go, the Lord is going to encourage me, but he's not going to push me. So even in that measure, the Lord creates room for growth, but he can't grow something that you don't want to grow in your own garden. So I don't know if I was going to go there yet, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did. That's a mic drop moment right there because, it's really interesting because you're talking about that in your own walk of saying, hey, I'm responsible for my own spiritual growth. The reality is also we grow in community. We grow with spiritual mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers who encourage us in our faith. But the reality is right. I can't, even as a spiritual leader and a leader within a community, I can't make someone grow. Right. And even you're saying, like, the Lord can't make you grow. That's a crazy statement. Yeah. That the God of the universe is limited by our capacity to partner with him in our growth.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
That's crazy.
That's a God who honors free will and choice. Yeah. And like you said, that God's a loving God. Has that been a journey for you, finding that God loves you and learning how to do that?
Yeah, it's been a journey of like, first it was just like knowing about God and then knowing God. And so like understanding his love in the beginning it was very cliche. Like, I know God loves me. And then I'm like, okay, now I know that, Jesus, he sent his son to die for me, a son, like his one beloved son. And like that greater understanding of love coming with action. But then really like a big like moment for me. I remember there's a ministry, International House of Prayer, Corey Russell.
Yeah.
First time he said, when you read Genesis and you read in the beginning, he said, I just want you to close the book and think about before in the beginning God was. And I went through like loops in my mind, like God was there before in the beginning. And so for me, it was like, why does this God who has no beginning want me and love on me? And I like, that is just another depth of love I'm currently experiencing now, because there's nothing I can do for him to make him not love on me more. And so like, I'm growing in that now, and I just see it kind of as like baby steps. I'm still a toddler. I'm only 11 years saved. So I'm still a baby, and learning about his love is going to take the rest of my life.
For real. Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, so let's tie this into your journey of faith.
Yeah.
I love that because you're talking about Genesis, and like you're making my mind hurt right now. But it's like the origin story of God.
Yeah.
Like there is no origin story because there was no beginning.
Right.
There was in the beginning, there was a pre-beginning, right?
Yep.
Anyways, talk to me about like when did you know that you had a desire or propensity for creativity?
Man. Okay. So I always share like in my story of coming to like musical creativity. In the 5th grade, I used to write poems. And I played saxophone a lot. So I was in a band, my middle school band.
5th grade.
5th grade. So like I played from 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. And I had pretty bad altercation with my music teacher freshman year of high school, which led me to have to drop out of band, which is something I never thought I'd ever do.
Because you loved it?
Because I loved it.
So sax was your first instrument?
Flute was my first.
Oh.
And then saxophone was my like, it was like my diehard instrument.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And so I remember it was freshman year and I stopped playing saxophone because of what happened with my teacher. And someone had stolen my notebook, brought it up to this rap group up the hill. They're like, nah, dude, you're not
Your poetry book.
My poetry book. Yeah.
Okay.
He took it.
Was that like when you were writing poetry? Hey, how'd that start? You just started doing it?
So I didn't get to listen to a lot of like hip hop and R&B growing up because I was very sheltered. So like everything I heard was like gospel hymns and like cultural, like Jamaican, like Christian songs.
Because your parents are Jamaican?
Right. My parents from Jamaica. So I kind of had to like be with my cousins to hear like the latest mixtape or like hear what's happening here, what happening there. So when I finally got like my itch of hip hop, I was like, I don't know if I can rap, but I can definitely do a little poem. So I just did like little poems, little poems there. And then my boy saw my notebook and then he stole it to bring to this rap group. And it was like, yo, you guys need to get this dude because he's good.
Wow.
So I was kind of chorused into rapping. But like the moment that you're asking about, it was like the first time we were in like this makeshift studio and they had like a microphone plugged to the computer and like we're all in this room. And I remember like he had like it's called like a DAW, like a digital audio software. I remember him like using the software and I just stared at the screen and I just remember in my head, I just heard he's not doing it right. And so I was like, yo, dude, like you're not doing it right. And he's like, you don't even know what this is. But just like in my mind, I just knew he wasn't doing it right. And so I just grabbed it and I just immediately knew what to do.
Wow.
So that was when I started doing a lot of music and it kind of just like clicked to me. But then I got very like hands-on with computers. And then like with the age of like YouTube, I went on YouTube to learn how to do any and everything.
Wow.
And like it just, things in my mind would click. Like even photography, I went to Norwalk Community College to do a photography course and I failed. Like I passed with a D-. I consider that failing and it just didn't click. And I was like, I'm gonna have to learn on YouTube. And in 3 months, it just clicked.
So you just did tutorials.
Mm-hmm. Tutorials, and then I have to go out into the world and then put it to practice to figure out my own methodology.
So, so you realized you were creative.
Mm-hmm.
You realized like you had a gifting.
Yeah.
To go, hey, this just clicks for me. It makes sense for me.
Yeah.
Brad, talk to me about what goes on in your heart when you're in that process of creating.
Like, what are we creating?
So, when you're writing a song.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So normally my process, I'm heavy on atmosphere. So sometimes lyrics will come to me first and then I can put it down. But 70 to 80% of the time, I'll just listen to instrumentals all day. And I'll hear an instrumental and be like, okay, like I like this. Like I'm huge on production, first and foremost. I'm huge on production and I'm huge on things sounding really good to the ear. And then I'll pray and I'll just get in a space where I'm like, okay, God, what do you want to talk about? Recently, I've been having more kind of one-on-ones with the Lord where he's been giving me the freedom and asking me what's on your heart that you want to talk about. And especially when I think of, how it says in the Psalms, like sing a new song, like it's crazy to think like the Lord knows everything about my brain, but he still encourages me to sing a new song, And so I kind of get into that space and then I'll say, okay, well, like, not that it becomes prayers, but I think about like, what's on my heart right now? What have I been seeing that I want to address? Is there something that you're seeing that you want to address? And normally it's that first line. Whatever that first line is, it's going to set up the entire song. And I never know how it's going to unfold, but sometimes it'll just start to unfold and I'm like, I guess we're going in this direction. And then it flows and then I'm like, that's not bad. That's a pretty good song. I know God wrote it when I can listen to it and I feel like I'm listening to another artist.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I normally don't listen to my music. It's just like a little weird thing for me. I don't ever listen to it unless I'm preparing for a show. But there's certain songs I'm like, I don't even think about like I'm putting on myself. I'm like, God's about to speak to me right now. Yeah.
So do you feel with that sometimes that, you're working not Brad doing something for God, but Brad doing something with him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what happens in your heart when you know that if you're in the flow of that?
First of all, I know that it's going to, I do my best to make sure that it's flowing from a place of our relationship. Because it can be very easy to create things and then desire others to look at it to get approval, especially when it comes to music, and especially just when it comes to our age of streaming and shows and like all of these type of things. You can put something out and then believe that the value of it is based upon the response that you get back, and to avoid
how many
that
downloads, how many likes,
right,
how many responses,
stuff,
comments,
all of the Instagram reactions. And it first has to come from a place of like, okay, Lord, I invited you into this space when I wrote it, produced it, rapped it, recorded it, mixed it, and mastered it. A, how do you feel about it? And then B, how do I feel when I hear it? Is it empowering me, encouraging me, inspiring me? Is it challenging me? And then after that, I'm like, this is a good song because it did everything before I released it. So that's a lot of what happens in the mix. And when it's flowing, I'll stay in that space until I feel it's time to either like take a break, because I can be in the studio all day. So I have to force myself to utilize time properly.
Okay, so you say you can be in the studio all day.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
It's the atmosphere. It just becomes like a euphoric atmosphere of creation, and it feels like an endless opportunities to create new things. And it's like how I was reading Proverbs the other day, and it talks about like this wellspring from the inside. And even just like when you think of like when you think of like a wishing well, right? Yeah. Like that water shoots up and then it goes down and then recycles itself to come back up again, right? But to the human eye, it looks like brand new water. But I feel in that same breath that like when God bubbles like fresh things on the inside of us, that he can use elements of those things to make new things all over again and again and again. And so for me, sometimes, especially I compare it to like my prayer time. Like the more time that I spend with the Lord, the more that I'm going to get out of it. And in the same ways, when I want to produce something, if I'm singing a song towards the Lord, or if I'm making music that I know that are going to impact people, I want to stay in that space because I know that it's not just important for me, but it's important for others. Yeah. And so just having that thought of like, wow, someone might hear this and a thought will run through their mind to say, you know what, maybe I don't want to end my life anymore, which I've had a lot of those encounters before. Wow. And I just think about, the first thing I think about is, what was I doing when I wrote that song? And I think of that entire process and I'm like, wow, those are powerful places for me to be.
That's awesome. So it sounds like, if I'm getting this right, for you, you've been learning that there's the end product, but for you the process is as important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just I want to create a product for people, or even a product, which sounds like a good thing, of creating a product for God.
Yep.
But I want the process.
Right.
It sounds like you want it to be saturated with God's presence.
Yeah, it needs to be.
And living, you said you want it to flow out. You want to live from the overflow of that.
Right.
You know the difference between the two? Do you know the difference in your heart between like, hey, just doing a product versus God in the process?
Yeah. I can tell based upon what it sounds like in the middle of it, on my attitude when I'm recording it, which encourages me on how I use my energy towards things. Even like when it comes to, if I have like some peers of mine that do music and they ask me to get on a song, I'm huge on topics. I'm huge on themes. I'm huge on like what's the goal in this, you know? And if I get someone that's like, yo, just go off and just do what you do. For me, I still need to have a topic in mind. So I'm still going to sit and say, all right, Lord, I know they said just go off and do what I do. What do you want to talk about? And sometimes it's just kind of like writing on faith. Even if I don't have anything concrete, I'm just going to kind of start going somewhere. And I'm like, I see how this can be themed towards something. And then I'll just roll through that.
That's
I'm
awesome.
huge on themes. Yeah.
Is it you're huge on themes because you want the song to go somewhere, or you want to take someone on a journey, or is it you just saying, hey, I don't want to just have rhymes for rhyme's sake?
I think I'm just like a natural like storyteller. I'm huge on stories.
Go deeper, Brad.
I'm huge on like what's it called? Like everybody's life in their own eyes is their own movie, right? And first time ever last year, I read a book on songwriting and music production, which I've never done before. And I think I was like, the Lord gave him that idea because it didn't come from him. He said, music becomes the soundtrack to people's lives. And for me, I was like, wow. So now as I'm thinking about that and I'm going into the lab with God, I'm like, okay, this storyteller here is going to line up with someone's life. But also now, anytime that they hear it or they play it, is going to be linked to a different memory or episode in their life that's going to have a reaction on what they do the next day or the next week or the next month. So that's why I'm just huge on like, I feel everything is a story and everything is attached to our own individual stories. So, I mean, for me, every time that I spend writing something with God, like it's a part of me and his story, that I spent time with him and we got to work on music together. In the same way that we can look at someone in the Bible and see that they had these, like when you see Abraham having this conversation with the Lord, like we can see that. And then we say, okay, they had the conversation. God kind of changed his mind about Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But then like when that scene ends, like we just turn the page, but Abraham's sitting there like, yo, God just let me talk to him for a couple of minutes. And he actually thought some of my ideas were okay. Like his mind is being blown. And now he's like, what's my conversation like with the Lord going to be next time? You know? So like, I just feel everything is about stories.
Well, and I love the way you describe it is just saying, you know, you've got a story that's in the song.
Yeah.
You have a story that's happening, unfolding while you're in the process of creating it.
Right.
Now you release it. Someone's listening to it. It becomes the soundtrack of their current story.
It's crazy.
And so his story and your story is connecting with their story. Because, you know, we all know this. Sometimes we'll hear a song and it takes us right back to, you know, right? We were talking before, you know, I was giving you my brief, you know, connection with hip hop starting in 6th grade with LL Cool J. I hear an LL Cool J song, I'm back to 6th grade. So, you know, catching sun outside my house, you know, there's that moment of my story intersecting with a song
Yeah.
that can bring you hear a beat, it brings you right back. But I loved that your heart was going, no, and all these stories intertwine.
Yeah.
So let's pivot real quick because I love that heart of story. By the way, we had Bruce Tell Me All in there. We asked him, what was some of your favorite film, because he's a videographer.
Yeah.
You should definitely listen to that podcast, projects. And he's like, oh, when I recorded Brad's story, when I recorded Zabbai's story, that project. We'll put that in the link too. You can watch it. If you didn't watch that podcast and link to it, we'll link to it again because it's more of Brad's story. But that's what Bruce was talking about. As a videographer, he loves to capture the story, whether it's people's stories or just the story of filmmaking.
Right.
So let me pivot real quick because there's some people that go, well, I don't do music. But you talked about poetry as an outlet of creativity, of your heart on paper before it became an outlet onto the digital realm in music. So you also perform.
Yeah.
So talk to me about when you perform, what's going on in you, through you. What's your heart for performance? How do you see creativity and faith intersecting with when you perform?
When I perform, yeah,
because it's a very different outlet.
It is
than the pre-production or production.
Yeah. Performing is very empowering time because I'm able to give people an insight on my mindset of when I wrote something. I find myself, sometimes I can be very talkative, but it's just because there's a lot that goes on in my mind. And some people don't like to think because they like to drown a lot of things out. So sometimes
they're afraid to think.
Sometimes they're afraid to think.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged to kind of be that voice for them to kind of be like, think about this a little bit, because you've been kind of just saying we're just going to go with the flow of life instead of pausing to think of why you are where you are exactly. So performing for me, there's a bunch of things I think about. First, I'm huge on excellence. I'm huge on knowing the God of fun and the God of joy. And so when I have,
which is real cool. It's one of our sanctuary core values. We have fun.
Yeah.
And joy is our attitude. I love that heart.
Yeah.
When you think about the God of joy and the God of fun.
Yeah. And when you think about just a rapping performance, you're thinking about energy, you're thinking about hype, and you're thinking about I want to have a great time, but I also want to be impacted. And so these are all of the things that I think about when I get on stage. But when I have a microphone in my hand, there's just a moment where I'm there are going to be people in this room that are for a moment in time going to listen to anything that I have to say. And so I think about that and I say, now I get to share my experiences with God over something that sounds very, very familiar to them of other scenes that they've heard music. But then I also, I remember, can I share this story that I had?
I love it.
It was a little while ago, maybe 2014. And I remember I went to this, it was a church in the Bronx. It was this Brazilian church. And I remember I'd performed there 4 times. And man, when I got there, all I could think about, here's what I felt. I felt like Eminem in 8 Mile. I was in the bathroom, hands on the sink,
P Rabbit.
I didn't eat spaghetti today, but I'm gonna throw up something. I don't know what's going on. And I was sweating. I'm trying to Lord, are we good? What's going on? And I had this moment when I got on the stage, of this I saw God on his throne, and he was I'm watching you. And it was not I'm watching you, you better be good, but he's I love that you use what I put in you.
Wow.
And I love when you sing it back to me.
Wow.
And man, that messed me up. It messed me up because then sometimes I'm able to minister to people, but then there's sometimes I'm just having a one-on-one with God.
Wow.
And I get I get to scream it at the loudest capacity that these speakers can scream it. But I know that he hears me even when I'm in my closet.
Wow.
You know, and so
So you're having this one-on-one moment in a crowd full of people.
Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
it's crazy.
So what you said, like, I'm watching you, but it was more like a proud dad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't because you were in front of a large group.
No, because it was like after I had that moment, I understood that, like, I don't know, maybe it was like my physical body was aware that the presence of God was there. Because it's so easy to get, like, as a Christian artist, it's so easy to get caught up in, like, you know, I'm here and I'm here to, like, to serve people, and I need to make sure what I'm going to say is going to edify them and encourage them. And, like, you want to hit all of these things, like, not realizing God was there way before you ever got there. And God is going to be doing all of the aftercare when they get home and they listen to whatever that they listen to, that it's not my full job to get them to this point of becoming. It's just my job to share with them, here's what God did in my life. I just put it in song format, and I hope that it touches you to be impacted in your story that he has with you.
Wow.
And so for me, like, for that night specifically, I think God just wanted to remind me, like, almost like I kind of consider it like sports. I don't know what movie I'm thinking of, but he was just like, hey, listen, it's me and you. Like, we're right here. Like remember that this is about us, and you don't have to add any extra pressure to be like this great thing that you've seen maybe another artist do, or how you've seen someone else kind of like move a crowd, so to speak. That it's like me and his relationship. I'm going to desire to do things in excellence because I know God made me in excellence. Right. But there's not this crazy pressure that I'm going to fail. Because I if I'm holding God's hand, I really can't fail. You know, it's my own kind of parameters that I'm setting myself up to tell myself that I failed. But if he's holding my hand, he's like, how can you fail right now?
Yeah. His definition of failure and yours are totally different.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, you know what I think about? I always love saying this, like Peter walked on water, right? And they always talk about that he fell. But there's a whole bunch of dudes in the boat that was like, dang, Peter, you fell. But then I always think about when the Lord pulled him up, at some point in time, Peter put his knee on the water. And then he stood up, and then they walked back to the boat. So there's still, like, he fell, but then he walked back on that water to get back on that boat. Right. So technically he didn't, like Jesus said, like, you know, why did you lose faith? But he was like, all right, bro, get up. We need to go walk back to the boat. You know, so Peter had faith to walk with him back to the boat.
True.
So I see it as like, it was a failure, but then it was a lesson of winning at the same time. So yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, not only that, those guys are like, yeah, Peter fell. Yeah, you're still in the boat. At least he got out of the boat, right?
Right.
You know, he's got a story to tell, not you.
Yeah.
You know, your story is, I saw this happen. His was.
I'm sure the following day they were like, hey, Peter, can you teach me how you did that? He's like, yeah, you can talk to the Lord about that. Don't talk to me about it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's good. The whole thing about storytelling, and telling your story. And then I love that thing of just feeling God's pleasure. It reminds me of Eric Liddell, right? Who was an Olympic runner, who got criticized because he felt a call to be a missionary, but went to the Olympics first. And he says to his sister, yeah, you know, I know God made me to be a missionary, but he also made me fast.
Wow.
And when I run, I feel his pleasure.
Wow.
And
I love that.
basically, I hear you saying the same thing. When I'm doing what God's created me to do, in the way that God's called me to do it, I feel the pleasure of the Father.
Yeah.
You had a moment with him that bypassed the product of performing that was there. I want to hit two more things.
Yeah.
You said that, you know, it's your story that you're expressing. You're writing poetry. Where have you seen where people who may not have that gift or that ability to verbalize what's going on inside of them, they don't have ability to communicate it, to get it out of them, where have they found at times a voice in your music where it's been your words, your story that you've written out, but something sparked inside of them to go, man, that, like you said, touched me, or I found my story in your creative ability?
Man, I gotta go in the crates. Um,
Or have you seen that? Have you seen where people said, hey, this song had an impact on me?
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm thinking about, I kind of have two songs in mind, but one song for sure is the song I wrote called AO. And it's called AO stands for Anointed Ones. And my idea behind it, my thought process behind it was just this understanding that, like, with the Great Commission, right? Like when Jesus is about to go into heaven, like he calls us to release his kingdom into the earth. And it just immediately I'm like, okay, well now, like we've been anointed to go out and spread his kingdom. I have a good friend, Eric Vanderkolk, shout out to him. I remember when I was going on a road trip to California, and he was talking about some of his time that he spent in Wall Street. And he said, you know, there was a time when the Lord was calling him out. And he said this to me about 8 years ago, and I'll never forget it. And he said to me, one thing for certain that I know is that God is calling people to be at the top of these Wall Street buildings, because there are those that will work their life in that building, and God has to send someone up to them because they might not ever go into a church. And it broadened my understanding of there are certain gifts God puts on the inside of us to turn around for him, to bring us into places where people are, because they might not ever come to where we are. So for AO, for Anointed Ones, I talked about, you know, like maybe God is calling you to be a lawyer, or he's calling you to be a banker. Maybe he's calling you to be in sports, but he can be calling you and giving you the gift to get you into places where people are within that atmosphere, because they won't go to where you are. And so it's this, for me, I grew up in a Pentecostal church, right? And so when I heard anointed, it was about ministry in the format of preaching, teaching, evangelizing, prophesying. That's it. Like those are the only, like you'd go in and you'd hear like a singer, they're anointed, right? But if they're like, yo, like you're an incredible lawyer, but they never say, yeah, you're anointed for being a lawyer.
Yeah.
But they could very well be anointed to be around other lawyers that want nothing to do with church.
For real.
You know, so yeah. I've had a lot of conversations with people about those specific topics where they kind of had this aha moment, like God is actually calling me to this specific thing to make a difference where I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just having this thought. It's a crazy thought. So you're talking about using hip hop. You're talking about being a lawyer, being a financier. My dad, who's 83 years old, his mobility isn't great, but he crochets while he's sitting there, and he crochets blankets for chemo patients, or hats for newborn babies. That and just that thought, like I would never probably logically or just naturally think, oh yeah, AO, Anointed Ones crocheting, right? But if God's in it, it's a form of creativity. Amen. It's a form of, and then using that to get into places and impact people that maybe wouldn't normally be impacted or touched and served in that way.
That's very true.
That's in that this whole season 2, when we're talking about creativity, we also want to broaden the definition of what creativity looks like, because we often think of, it looks like music, it looks like art and photography. And we are highlighting some of those mediums, but the reality is we want everyone to realize, that God has given you creative abilities. Right. They might not normally fit in like a performing arts or a fine arts school or expression. So for those who are listening, who either say, I'm not very creative or I'm not unbelievably talented, what advice would you give them? Coming from your perspective of being an anointed one, creative person. Yeah.
Man, I think this is like the more and more that I get to spend time with people, I can realize strengths that people have, and they're just gifted at those strengths that they're good at. And personally, what I would say is you need to have creativity to do something well, and then to learn how to do it better in anything, I would say personally. Even like, I feel like I'm pretty decent at math, but I always think about like those, like if you put, 20 times 20 plus 10 plus 5 and put 5 people in a room, they'd all put it together differently, and some people's brains are wired to think certain ways, but then they're also going to say, how can I be more efficient to get this problem solved faster? I would say to that, it takes a measure of creativity on how to do something better. So that's what I would say for those that don't believe they're not creative because they're not doing what the world would say is the definition of creativity. If you're talking about arts, media, photography, like there are so many ways that it requires like creative energy to do something different and do something better. And you kind of have to tap into that mindset to do it.
That word, creative energy. Brad, someday we're going to do a whole podcast on creative energy.
I like it. I thought you wanted to do a freestyle really quick. I was like,
yeah, nobody wants to hear that. There's creativity, and then you talk about excellence. Let's leave that one alone there, Brad. Maybe you could do it.
Oh, man.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. To end the podcast, I'd love for you for those who are listening, for those who are desiring more of a creative expression or excellence or platform in their life, can you just, release a blessing over those? And so if you're listening, just receive this blessing. You can agree with it, pray into it, and we're so stoked to have you here, Brad. So I'd love to have you end that way by just giving a blessing.
That'd be great. Yeah, I just speak a blessing over the creative ability that God has put on the inside of you when you were in your mother's womb. I just speak the creator of the universe, the word creator, creative is in it. And I believe that in the same way that he spoke the world into existence, he used creative energy and used his words instead of his hands. I believe that he has placed the same creative ability on the inside of you. And I just bless that. And I just speak for it to come to life in your life if you feel like it's been dead or feel like it's been less than others. And I also come against any comparisons that you may have had with other people that feel like they are ahead of you, and to not compare your creative ability to others.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hey, thanks everyone who have been following us, listening to us. Thanks for all the likes and the comments on it. Would love to have you. Please follow our podcast at Sanctuary CT. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you find this podcast so you don't miss it one session. If you've been impacted, please send us an encouraging word of a like or a comment. Would love to have you share it with your friends, your family, even other creatives, other hip hop artists or people who like hip hop artists. And also follow us on Instagram. We are Sanctuary. If you live in Southern Connecticut or want to visit, we'd love to have you join us at Black Rock Church for Sanctuary Community, 5 o'clock on Sunday nights. Join us. Brad and I will be there.
We'll be here.
We'd love to meet you, greet you, and have you join us whenever we're doing. Awesome. Bless you guys. Have an amazing day.
Take care.
Chillin' with my L's from the AM to the PM. We looking foreign to him like I'm whipping in the BM. Married to the Lord, why you sliding in my DMs? Got a carpet every DM, running out the mausoleum from the old me. Now I'm holy, boy, I'm covered by the OG. The blood is on me, ain't no weapon that can harm me. He got an army, just getting started like a car. Keep talking malarkey, say it to me, I should hawk and then reveal.